But then there was obviously the period where Sunderland became probably maybe the biggest banter club in the UK, partly just because of the double relegation, as you said. So went down from the Premier League to the Championship, then consecutive seasons went down to Championship to League One. But also because the whole thing was captured on Netflix in a documentary, which is probably one of the most well-known football documentaries ever made. I've actually never seen it.
Have you not?
Which I think is a crime.
You should sort that out. I say that now. It's much easier to recommend it now we're back, in inverted commas. But it's an amazing sports documentary and so much better, in my opinion, than the sort of all or nothing documentaries, which are so sanitized and Americanized, etc. But yeah, it was, I mean, to go through the kind of my fandom era, we were very good in Sunderland terms in like the late 90s.
Kevin Phillips, European Golden Boot.
Exactly, European Golden Boot. Early 2000s, like consecutive 7th-place finishes, then kind of drop off, get relegated. Roy Keane takes over and we're bottom of the Championship in maybe October and get promoted. Then we kind of stabilise in the Premier League for a couple of years. Martin O'Neill era is quite good. Then Steve Bruce. And then comes like a number of different like chop and change managers every couple of seasons, just about survive, get relegated under David Moyes, who said we were in a relegation battle after 2 games. And he was right. He was ultimately right, but it was never went down particularly well. And then at the start of the next season is when season 1 of Sunderland Till I Die kicks off. And there's a scene early doors where Celtic are coming to play a game at the Stadium of Light in pre-season. And I think it's Lee Cattermole is saying, or someone in the press team is saying to Lee Cattermole, I think we'll go up quite easily this year. And everyone is so full of optimism. I think we lose 5-0. And everyone's like, we've got a few issues here. Then comes like a succession of really mediocre managers. Chris Coleman was probably the highlight, but Phil Parkinson, Jack Ross did quite well. But we then obviously do the double drop. We spend 4 years in League One. And we're never really, despite the fact we are the biggest club in League One, and I don't even mean that to be disrespectful to the others, but I think we are.
Yeah, Sunderland's a big club.
We just never even looked like getting anywhere close to automatic promotion. We were kind of scraping into the playoffs every year. And the first year we're in League One is the year that Stuart Donald and Charlie Methven take over. And Stuart Donald was at Oxford United beforehand, and you can see it on the final day of the January transfer window. He is saying that they want to sign Will Grigg, and they make a call. They chat between them before they start this call. I think he was at Wigan at the time. And they say, like, we're not going to go above £1.25 million. And it goes on and on and on. The more panic sets in, like the deadline is coming closer and closer. It's amazing TV, if quite sad from a Sunderland perspective. And eventually we pay, I think it was £4.4 million for Will Grigg.
Jeez.
And you're just like, you guys are just not making good decisions here. And yeah, that we lose in the final few minutes of the playoff final that year against Charlton.
I remember watching
and they're
that.
filming it. They're filming their reactions, and the colour just completely drains from their faces as they basically bet everything financially on Sunderland going up that year. And from then on, it's a real struggle. We eventually get up through Alex Neil, and we beat Wickham, and Elliot Embleton scored, and Ross Stewart scored. That was my favourite ever football game. And I was about to mention that but it obviously it meant something, obviously, so I couldn't really include it in the category. But do you know when the day just goes perfectly? Like, it shouldn't have gone that well. And the last playoff final in May was completely different. But the stadium was maybe 60,000 Sunderland fans in there. We scored quite early. Ross Stewart then sealed it. Wickham never really looked like coming back into it. And it was just quite relaxing for the final 10 minutes. And supporting Sunderland is never relaxing. And we get up to the Championship. Alex Neil leaves just before the season starts, or maybe actually after a couple of games. Tony Mowbray comes in. And actually, the Championship always suited us more than League One because there is a bit more football being played.
Yeah.
We had players that... like Amad Diallo was on loan with us that year. And
I
was
forgot
just
about that,
phenomenal.
actually, yeah.
And he'd had that loan spell at Rangers and it hadn't really worked out. But we get up to the playoffs. We lose against Luton quite deservedly in the semi-final, but really good season. The following year was a disaster. Tony Mowbray gets fired and we're about 3 points off the promotion spots at that time. Michael Beale comes in, one of the most unpopular managers in Sunderland history. And I think we finished 16th that year. Then,
why was he unpopular? Not just from a football standpoint.
Well, there was. I don't know whether you saw it at the time. There was talk that he created a burner account on Twitter, And
Really?
quite a lot of evidence to suggest that he was sending people abuse and defending his name on Twitter. Look it up, guys. Look it up. And yeah, it was a complete disaster. And then then we went through months without finding a manager, appointed Régis Le Bris at the start of last season, and finished 4th in the Championship. But we were so far off Leeds and Burnley. We were actually closer to 17th place Oxford, I think, than Leeds and Burnley, who finished with 100 points last year. Got up through the playoff final. And that is such a sliding doors moment, because have you seen where Sheffield United are now?
Yeah,
At the bottom of the Championship, already got Chris Wilder back in.
I saw when they rehired him, the rumour mill was like, Chris Wilder set to make sensational return. I was like, it's not sensational.
He does this every few months.
Every year. It's not. This is the least sensational return ever. But your way of going up through the playoffs was also, well, incredibly stressful, but back-to-back last-minute winners like that.
It was pretty iconic. Yeah, I mean, even against Coventry in the semi-final, we were riding our luck at points across the two legs for sure. Dan Ballard scores that amazing goal, really weird sort of stooped header.
Yeah.
Gets in a really weird position, but it's an iconic moment. And then the playoff final, I was actually writing about this week. 72 seconds in, Kiefer Moore gets a header at the back post, and Anthony Patterson makes this unbelievable save down to his left, kind of scooping it almost off the line. And you're just like, wow, we were under so much pressure for the first 50 minutes of that game, grew into the game, and by the end were the better side. But Mayende equalises, and then Tommy Watson, who was already going to Brighton at that time, a sort of, academy graduate, big talent, but hadn't necessarily always been a key part of the side last year, especially after Enzo Lefebvre arrived in January, scores the winner with his final kick in a Sunderland shirt, and Sunderland are back in the Premier League after 8 years. So it was a pretty iconic way to go up, and hell of a day out.
It's a shame that Sunderland Till I Die wasn't being filmed for that.
I know, they stopped when we got good.
Yeah. Do you think that they made that documentary with the intention of it being like a feel-good, we're going up, look at us, we're great, and it just turned into a complete shit show?
I would have thought so. I think it's made by a production company called the Fulwell Brothers, who also do a lot of work with James Corden, and the Fulwell Brothers are both Sunderland fans. And so I think they weren't looking to kind of mock the club.
No.
It wasn't made in jest. It was just the characters that we had at the club at the time were just very funny. I mean, in the worst possible sense for a Sunderland fan. Like Martin Bain, the chief executive at the time, is just David Brent. I mean, it opens with him like swimming in his pool and then coming out and just talking about transfer business on the side of the pool. It's like, what are you doing? And then there's the whole Will Grigg episode, etc. So I think they were looking for a feel-good story. And there's also that iconic scene, which you might have seen, where Charlie Methven, who's this like old Etonian, really posh, chief executive, I think he was, and he's speaking to the Sunderland staff, and he's like, we need to change the intro music when the players come out the Stadium of Light, because for years, I don't know the official name for the song, but it's the Apprentice music. It's like dun 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 dun, and he's like, it doesn't instill belief, it doesn't get the fans going, and then he's like, listen to this EDM music, and you can see everyone's in the rest of the room just being like, what is this idiot? Like, why are we doing this? Who is this guy? And it's just become an iconic clip. There's also one where Martin Bain on the first day of pre-season, or in the, they're doing a transfer committee, and on a whiteboard at the back they've got the players they want to target, and there's like some quite sensible names on there. There's like Scott McTominay before he made his Man United breakthrough, etc. But at the bottom of the list is like Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and the iconic quote is like, why the fuck am I looking at Zlatan Ibrahimovic on that list?
I can't work out if it would be net good or bad for Sunderland that documentary was made, and people,
I think brand awareness wise, I mean, I sound like such a knob even saying that, but like it probably did increase Sunderland's awareness around the world. But I mean, every away game for years, it was like, we've seen you crying on Netflix, and it was pretty bleak. Like they'd cut to these fans that literally give everything. Like I, in the grand scheme of things, am not a good Sunderland fan whatsoever. There are people that live and breathe the club, that give all their money to the club, buy all the merch, are obsessed with it. Like Sunderland is a place in the UK that's kind of been left behind, and there's so much anger towards sort of a London-centric government. I mean, it was one of the first places to vote for Brexit, and I think that's kind of speaks to the fact it feels like it's not been given much of a chance by the current government, or the previous government in particular. So there's so much animosity to the way it's been treated, and people give everything for the club. And I know everyone says, oh, our fans really care, but I think Sunderland's, are right up there in terms of caring the most about their club. And to watch these fans, taxi drivers, or people that there was a priest being interviewed at one stage, and you watch them throughout the season, and then you watch them at Wembley when we've conceded a last-minute winner against Charlton, like crying in the stands. It's amazing TV, but it's really bleak at the same time. It shows like the best and worst of being a fan, and then it all kicks off again, and season 2 comes out, and then season 3 was the positive one when we got promoted from League One, but we've kind of called it a day since then.
Yeah, they should have carried on going. I agree with you about Sunderland fans caring. I think that's, maybe this is a generalisation, but I think that's the case like the further north you get as well, because I went to uni in Newcastle, and Newcastle fans are the same. They
absolutely
live and breathe football, but it makes for a good atmosphere. You talk about like following the fans at Wembley and seeing them cry and stuff. I don't like sad endings and things, so I always think like, oh, imagine how they would be now, like watching you score a last-minute winner at Wembley last season. There's a clip from when Man City scored against QPR, obviously the Aguero goal, which I think was mentioned on the podcast last week, actually. And there's a bit in the injury time beforehand where it goes to this fan, and he's got a scarf, and he's like smacking his chair, and he's like raging. And for ages, I saw that clip and I was like, I wish they had his reaction when they scored, because it would have been so different. And like a few years later, I was watching this like mini documentary about it, and they interviewed him, the guy who was whacking the chair with his scarf, and then they showed his reaction when they scored. And I was like, oh, that makes me feel nicer about it.
I love that.
I asked you at the start like what your favourite game was that you went to that ultimately meant nothing. My least favourite game that I went to that ultimately meant nothing involved Sunderland.
Oh yeah.
Palace 0, Sunderland 4, the year you went down. At Selhurst Park, we were 4-0 down at half-time to David Moyes' Sunderland side.
That is bleak. That is the lowest of the low.
I think it was the lowest point Palace have ever been at, or since promotion. It's the lowest point we've been at. A fan ran on the pitch as the players were walking off and tried to fight Damien Delaney. I think we conceded 3 goals in added time at the end of the first half. We just totally imploded. And this was like, relegation Sunderland, the worst iteration of Sunderland the Premier League has seen in my lifetime, probably. It was so bleak.
God, I don't even remember that. I think that season is such a disgusting blur, really. And David Moyes has never really been forgiven by Sunderland fans as well, which I think is a little bit harsh, because if you are so inept in the transfer window for so long, sign so many flops for so long, clearly have players that don't really care enough about the club. Even in that first year of Sunderland Till I Die, you see Darren Gibson, like after 6-7 pints in a pub arguing with Sunderland fans, and they're like, don't you have training tomorrow? And he's like absolutely smashed. And then they also interview Jack Rodwell when they're kind of begging him to leave the club. And look, I do kind of see it from a player's perspective. If they've been offered a £50,000 per week contract by a club for 3-4 years, they're kind of within their rights to say, well, the club offered me it. But it got to a stage where it was just so toxic that it became really, it was like one of the sort of most divisive moments, and well, not even divisive, because everyone was just against him, and the poor guy must have been getting endless abuse, but it was really, really uncomfortable. And it just felt like not enough players were really invested in the club's long-term future. Whereas now it does feel like somehow we've attracted these players from all over the world, some of which are coming from Champions League clubs, who do seem to instantly get it.
How do you think Sunderland have done that?
Well, I think it's partly the players that we've brought in and the kind of recruitment strategy that we did to do that. So Kirill Lewis-Dreyfus is our owner. He's, I think, 26. His dad used to own Marseille. His dad sadly passed away, so he's by default a multi-millionaire. And he has a lot of contacts in the French top flight in Ligue 1. He's best friends with Ousmane Dembele, so Ousmane Dembele is often at the Stadium of Light, which is quite fun.
So that is true.
Yeah.
Because I've read that before, and I've seen we
sent out a congratulatory tweet when he won the Ballon d'Or.
Really? I saw someone say that, like, who was it? That their mate was convinced that Ousmane Dembele goes to the Stadium of Light regularly, and people were like, oh my God, obviously that's not true, but that is true.
I mean, regularly is maybe a stretch, but I think he's been 3 times.
Wow.
And obviously Jude Bellingham went quite a lot last year because of Job. But Kirill Lewis-Dreyfus appointed this guy called Florent Gisolfi, who used to work at Lens and Lorient and Roma, and he's got great contacts in Europe. We've also got Christian Speakman, who's got great contacts in the EFL. So he kind of built the side that came up from the Championship. And we hadn't really spent very much money. I think the side that started the playoff final. And look, that's partly down to the fact we hadn't signed Enzo Lefebvre permanently at that stage. But I think it would cost £11 million. And so there was huge leeway when you win the most lucrative playoff final there's ever been because of the new TV rights deal with the Premier League to really spend. And we had so much leeway with PSR. And we have slightly gambled because I don't think we got enough players out the club and we didn't get enough fees for some of the players that were kind of not going to start anymore or not even be in the sort of wider squad for match days. But we still got a lot of money for Joe Bellingham. Tommy Watson went for a fairly decent fee in the end. And then, so I think it's a combination of contacts and then getting the key guy in the door, which for me is Granit Xhaka, showed that the project was like quite serious from the get-go. I don't think we necessarily get Nordi Mukiele, who was on loan at Bayer Leverkusen last year, and you could see from his introductory video that the club put out on social media, like, he's really good friends with Granit Xhaka, and we don't then get Alderete from Getafe, who was in La Liga Team of the Season last year. Like, I think we signed a lot of players that mid-table Premier League clubs would have wanted, and I know that for a fact because I do a podcast every week with a Villa fan, and he was like, we could have done with half these players. So it was a sort of combination of factors, and I think it does feel like this was a good season to kind of roll the dice because a lot of clubs are slightly hamstrung by still PSR concerns in the Premier League. We had a big leeway on that, and just realised that you do need to invest heavily if you want to survive in the Premier League because all the clubs that are currently in the league, except for the newly promoted sides, have been in there for at least 2 seasons with Premier League money for at least 4 windows. And it does make a massive difference. Like, the standard of player you guys have brought in for years now just puts you completely out of danger, really.
Yeah, it's we got promoted at a great time, Palace. Like, when there was a period, which I don't think this season will be the same because, obviously, as you said, Sunderland have been really good or look really good. I think even like Leeds and Burnley are putting up fights. But there was a big narrative, obviously everyone knows, that it was like, oh, Championship teams can't compete. Like, how are we meant to push mid-table when all these mid-table Premier League teams have so much money? And I was like, great. That's great for me. So we got promoted at the point where I think our playoff final was also the most lucrative in history. It was like, I think it was dubbed that £120 million game. But your one must have been worth...
I think they were talking about 210.
Yeah, it's crazy how much that's changed. But I have a theory that, and I said this last season when obviously all these teams went and won like major trophies for the first time in X amount of time. Obviously Newcastle did it, Palace did it, even Spurs in Europa League. And I always think there are seasons to target where like the good teams aren't quite at the level. And last season felt like that at the time. But this season almost feels like the same thing again. Like, I look at, and maybe I'm saying this because Palace look probably the best we ever have done at the moment, but I look at like Chelsea, I look at Spurs, I look at obviously United, are a different story. Even like City, I'm like, the gap between them and mid-table teams, I think has got smaller again this season. They don't look as like imperious as you would think they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you also look at clubs like Bournemouth, and I feel like Brighton probably could beat any side in the league as well on their day, although that day doesn't come around as often as you might expect given the quality of player they've got. But yeah, the sort of the quality of mid-table teams, when you've seen like Bournemouth sign, for example, FC Porto starting striker last year, and Evan Nilsson, and you guys have signed Jeremy Pino, who was one of the most highly rated wonder kids in Spain up until a few years ago, and has kind of got back to that level, but was looking like a sort of superstar of the Spanish team in the future, although injuries then slightly affected it. It does feel like there is quite a good opportunity, and then there's also Newcastle, Aston Villa having to be aware of PSR. It does feel like it was a really good opportunity for Sunderland to come up. And also, with the size of our stadium, our revenue could potentially be quite, if you get the club quite self-sustaining and stay up this year, invest heavily next year. And there's a lot of players that have been signed for. We spent a lot of money, but there weren't any ridiculous fees, I don't think, involved. Like Habib Diarra had been starting for Strasbourg for 3 years in Ligue 1. Noah Siddiqui had been starting for Union Saint-Gilloise for last couple of seasons as well. These are like 22, signed for £20 million or so. And you get one or two of these signings right. And at the moment, it probably doesn't feel like necessarily anyone looks like a £50 million player just yet. But I think as the season progresses and these players become more comfortable, there's an opportunity for one of the big clubs to come in for a Sunderland player, which kind of keeps the whole thing going, which was kind of the Joe Bellingham school of thought as well, because he was signed for, I think it was around £2 million and gets sold for 30 after 2 seasons to a Champions League club. And some people were angry about that, but it's just the way that football works.
Yeah.
And it's actually helpful for the model.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, Palace have done that too. Brighton are the best example. Like, you have to do that as a mid-table team. You've got to flip the players. Obviously, one player who you spoke about briefly earlier, and you definitely won't be flipping for a profit unless something mad happens, is Granit Xhaka. How much of a difference has he made to the team? First of all, was he even on your radar before the season started as someone you might sign? And did you think he would be as good as he has been?
No, I remember when it happened. I think it was late July. I thought it was a joke. I was like, I think I've been done by Fabrizio Nomano or something. And I was like, this can't actually be happening. And it quickly became clear that it was very much happening. And what was even more satisfying about it, and I don't really mean to dig him out because he's been through a pretty hellish time in the last couple of years, but Erik ten Hag was like, he's not leaving Leverkusen. We've lost too many top players. We need Granit Xhaka. And you could see why. I think it was their second most used player in the league last year. They obviously won the league and cup the year before, completely unbeaten, reached the Europa League final even last year. He was a regular starter. They lost so many other players like Frimpong and Wirtz and Tar, etc., and Radetzky in goal, and they couldn't really afford to lose Granit Xhaka. But Granit Xhaka had the offer of a Saudi Arabian club on the table. I forget which one. Could have stayed at Leverkusen and been captain and, led them into a new era under Erik ten Hag. But he said, no, I want to go to Wearside and back to Sunderland, which is a club that, he can't have known that much about, because I was looking it up. He played Sunderland once in his first season at Arsenal before we went down.
Yeah.
So, he doesn't know about the Stadium of Light. He wouldn't be watching. He wouldn't have watched Sunderland Till I Die. I'd be surprised if he had. And you could see from his first interview, and it was clearly one of those long press days, and he maybe didn't have that much energy at the end of it. But they were one-word answers, who are you most excited to play with at the Stadium of Light? And everyone was kind of taking the piss out of him because he didn't really name any players or didn't really know anything about the club.
Yeah.
But you could see how much he's got so invested in it now. I have fully dived into Granit Xhaka's social media. I'm reposting, I'm storing kind of everything that he does. And he's like the ultimate cheerleader. And that's actually sounds almost quite patronising, because his on-the-ball ability is phenomenal. For a side that aren't going to see that much ball this year, and as we already spoke about, have been quite realistic in the kind of style they're kind of setting up, to put Siddiqui and Diarra ideally alongside him, who have so much energy and legs to cover his lack of legs, and then let this guy dictate from a sort of central defensive midfield position, which he hasn't really played since his days at Arsenal, because he was always in a 2 at Leverkusen. And actually in his days at Arsenal, he kind of got teased quite a lot for kind of looking a bit like a ship when he turns or being caught on the ball. There's been none of that this year. And some of the balls he's played through. Prior to the United game, he'd assisted our last 3 goals in the league. We don't look like we're going to score a lot of goals this year. It just doesn't feel like that sort of side. So having that quality from dead balls and just progressing us through, cutting through the lines, absolutely massive. And on the back of that, I think, as I already mentioned, I think he encouraged a lot of other players to sign as well.
Kind of when you spoke about how he plays and the nature of the signing, it's kind of giving Cambiasso to Leicester vibes of how has he ended up there? But also that it shows the I know we just said there isn't a big gap in quality, but the gap in quality between a Big Six team and a non-Big Six team. Often players who maybe don't look up to scratch for those bigger teams. I know Jack had a really good end to his time at Arsenal. They drop down and you're just like, oh, that's actually the level. Palace have had so many players like that. Mamadou Sakho is the best example of that for me, where it's he was deemed surplus to requirements at Liverpool. We got him on loan. I thought he was like a donkey because all their fans took the piss out of him, and then he joined Palace. I was like, he might be the best centre back we've ever had.
Yeah.
The difference in quality is stark, I think,
For
sometimes.
Sure. There's also been a strong movement around in the Arsenal fan base that kind of regret letting Xhaka go, and kind of argue that Arsenal's attack, prior to this season at least, where they've definitely strengthened in terms of depth, etc., has never been as free-flowing or as entertaining without Granit Xhaka in the side. Because even when he was at his worst at Arsenal, if you ever looked at Premier League stats in terms of passes into the final third and progressive passes, so cutting through those lines, Granit Xhaka would always be in the top 5, even when he was being pilloryed for being a bit of a hothead and making mistakes, etc. So yeah, he's always had that ability, and it's fantastic to see it at my club. Still can't believe it.